Ben Shapiro, the great book, How to Destroy America in 3 Easy Steps. It is very poignant, and it is very prescient, and by that I mean it's very timely. All right, Ben Shapiro. So here's my question to you. Liberty is a wonderful thing. It means different things to different people. I won't get into positive liberty, negative, just liberty. When you see what's going on in the streets today, the very people who attacked the Founding Fathers and the Constitution are exercising their rights under the Bill of Rights. So some of them were slaveholders, some of them weren't slaveholders. You know, when they ratified the first 10 amendments, that included southern states. And so you have their freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of association, due process, the right to bear arms, you know, and so forth and so on. So people are exercising these rights under the Bill of Rights that they got from men who were slaveholders and men who weren't slaveholders while they're trying to destroy the country from within. How do we explain this? How do we deal with this?
I think one of the things that's happened is that, I guess, Mark, you and I, we're all lucky. We live in the first generation of truly good people. We live in a generation of people who have a free-floating morality that they've a priori come up with just out of the sunlight. And if you had plopped them down in 1850 and they were from Alabama, they obviously would have been anti-slavery. Everyone would have been anti-slavery. They would have been in favor of gay marriage in 1772. I mean, these are people who have a morality that is constructed out of their own heads and is so beautiful. They fail to recognize, of course, that every single moral value they hold is indicative of moral systems that came before them, that they actually stand on the shoulders of giants. Instead, they sort of claim to be both citizens of the world and their own moral creators. And not only that, they are the saints in their own moral paradigm. And that means that everybody else is a sinner or a heretic or an apostate. It's really, really dangerous stuff. I mean, recognizing that you got these gifts from people who lived in the past, who were living lives the same way you're living a life and came from a culture that is very different from your own. Recognizing the context of history is very important. But we've been told by our moral betters at the New York Times that recognizing context of history is irrelevant. And that instead, because we have now the great moral vision, we can cram that down however we choose. It's incredibly dangerous, obviously. The fact that there are so many who perceive themselves to be so righteous that they can tear down a statue of George Washington and then proclaim themselves more virtuous than George Washington and more important than George Washington. They've done something good for the country by doing so. It's really despicable, and it fails to recognize that the greatness of America, the greatness of the founding system, is that human nature exists, human sin exists, people are venal, people can be corrupt, people can be evil. The virtue of the founding system is that it allowed people to move beyond that, to check and balance one another, and to provide a system to make human beings value other things so that we can move beyond the problems of the founders. To the point where we now look at some of the behavior of the founders and we think that's unthinkable. The framework created by the founders allowed all of that to happen. To fail to recognize that is the height of arrogance. It really is despicable.
And the failure to recognize, like Black Lives Matter and their tie, their self-professed tie to Marxism and Antifa Marxist anarchist movement, and quite frankly, let's be honest, progressivism is sort of the bastard child of Marxism, an American style in many ways. It is amazing to me that they're virtue signaling that they claim to be more moral than the founders, when they embrace an ideology that is responsible for the death of 100 million human beings. And God knows about the torture and the enslavement. And none of these societies that give birth to Marxism by choice. It's always horrific violence. It's destroying the society, which is what Marx says. You may have a period of despotism. And yet these people claim to have, as you point out, the higher moral road, and they ignore 100, 120 years of history of Marxism. How do you explain that?
I think that it's very easy to be myopic in your view of history. And this is what you see so much from the 1619 Project. When you focus in on solely the problems with America, they're not hard to find. I mean, you can find problems with anybody or any system over time. It's only when you really contrast America with every place else you realize that what makes America great is what makes America unique. So what people on the left have a tendency to do is attribute every worldwide problem to America while taking all the things that are exceptional about America and saying, well, those are exceptional to America, meaning they're an exception to the American rules. So you'll see the left say things like American slavery is a unique blot on world history as opposed to part of a great chain, an evil chain of history that existed in every society. I mean, slavery literally existed in all societies, but American slavery was completely different and the apotheosis of all evil in a way that other slavery was not. This is sort of the line. Now, again, American slavery is as evil can be, right? Just like all other slavery is as evil can be. But the idea is that everything that is universally bad about human nature is unique to America. Everything that is universally good about America and uniquely good about America can be attributable to humanity writ more broadly. So when America puts a man on the moon, that is an achievement of humanity. It's not an achievement of America, it's an achievement of humanity. When America participates in slavery historically, that is not a cruelty and savagery that is universal across time and space until basically the end of the 18th century. That is instead a unique evil to America. And when people are that intellectually dishonest, you have to assume that they have another agenda, which of course they do, and that is to tear down the system entirely. I mean, you really see this mostly in the how to be an anti-racist kind of philosophy that you see from Robin DiAngelo and Ibram Kendi. Their suggestion is that racism must be redefined. Racism is no longer you believe in the inferiority of another group based on a group characteristic. Racism now means that you are complicit in any system that produces inequality, which is a Marxist premise, right? Because the premise is that the true goodness would be a system that produces equal results regardless of personal choice, and any system that does not produce that is obviously not only evil but racist in its inception. Okay, this has become an article of faith in the diversity training community. It's become an article of faith in the halls of the media. It is an explicitly Marxist premise, right? That the system is supposed to create not equality of rights before the law, not even equality of opportunity, but equality of outcome. And if a system doesn't create that, then it's inherently racist and bad. I mean, that's a Marxist premise from start to finish.
You know, Ben, when we return, I want to address moving from ideology to reality. They talk a good game, the hard left. They create this notion of utopia or paradise and egalitarianism, Marx, the withering away of the state, and we'll all just be wonderful. Of course, that never happens. What happens is humanity withers away under the iron fist of the Marxists and the left regime. But I want to talk about these areas in our own country where these experiments are taking place. We call them mostly the inner cities. What kind of equality do we have? What kind of opportunity is there? Do we ever talk about individualism and individual liberty and free will and competition? What is going on in these Democrat-controlled cities where my words, not yours, where the American Marxist model or statism or progressivism or whatever we want to call it is actually being instituted under one-party rule? We'll be right back.